Hey guys, how's everyone doing tonight? Welcome to another episode of Hockey on the Spot with Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for joining me today. This is episode 147 of Hockey on the Spot. And today I'll be continuing with the NHL's 30 teams in 30 days. And for today's video, we're going to conclude the Central Division by talking about the Colorado Avalanche. And man, oh man, oh man. The Colorado Avalanche, they're the last team to talk about this in this segment in the Central Division before we head out back to the Eastern Conference and do the Atlantic Division. So, let's talk about it, shall we? The Colorado Avalanche, they are definitely one interesting team to talk about, and it really all goes back to the lockout Jordan year, which was just an absolutely miserable season for the Colorado Avalanche, and it was a situation where they hadn't made the playoffs since 2010. They were the worst team in 2011, or one of the worst teams in 2011. 2010, 2011. 2011-12 turned out to be a slightly better year for them. They had a winning record that year, but they still missed the playoffs. And then the lockout Jordan year was just flat out miserable. Last place in the Northwest Division, last place in the entire Western Conference, and second to last place in the entire National Hockey League. Only the Florida Panthers finished with a worse record than the Colorado Avalanche that year. And yet, when the draft lottery comes around, it is the Avalanche and not the Florida Panthers who are rewarded with the first overall pick in what promised to be a very, very deep 2013 NHL draft class. The anticipations originally were that the Avalanche were going to take the highly touted defenseman Seth Jones, an American defenseman who was born in Texas, but also spent part of his life in Denver and grew up an Avalanche fan. But it was announced that the Avalanche would not take Seth Jones prior to the draft, and this came under the new management. Their new management came around before the draft. The Avalanche knew that a rebuild had to start. They could not go in with the same looking team as before, and it all started with the coaching changes. I believe Joe Sacco was the coach originally, was the coach during that 2012-13 season, and they let him go. In comes Patrick Waugh. Patrick Waugh becomes the new vice president of hockey operations and head coach of the Colorado Avalanche after head coaching the Quebec Ramparts of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. They also brought in a new GM, letting go of, forget who. Joe Sakic becomes the new GM of the Colorado Avalanche as well as president of hockey operations, and they announced prior to the draft that they would not take Seth Jones. Instead, they would go on to take the highly touted forward and prodigy Nathan MacKinnon of the Halifax Mooseheads rather than Seth Jones of the Portland Winterhawks. Seth Jones would ultimately go on to be taken 4th overall by the Nashville Predators. But Nathan MacKinnon was the first overall pick, and there were questions, and as good as a player MacKinnon was expected to be, there were a lot of people questioning that pick solely because of the fact that the Avalanche needed defense. That they were pretty much set on offense with Matt Duchene and Gabriel Landeskog and Paul Stastny and so on and so forth, and that they needed defense. Well, they took a gamble at taking Nathan MacKinnon, the most highly touted forward of that draft class, and then a rebuild began from there. They signed over some players to kind of help out the team. Not too many big signings, but players like Andre Benoit and so on and so forth. They traded for Alex Tanguay and Corey Sarich in exchange for David Jones and Shane O'Brien. They brought in quite a few players, but nothing major. And then going into the 2013-14 season, the Avalanche had very low expectations, and they weren't even expected to go that far in the standings. I mean, the big questions going into 2013-14 was pretty much Patrick Waugh and how he was going to handle himself as a head coach, because we all know the history, not just in hockey, but in all sports. The greatest players in leagues do not turn out to be the best coaches. In fact, the greatest players only turn out to be the worst coaches. Look at Wayne Gretzky when he coached the Phoenix Coyotes. He was a terrible coach. As great a player as he was a terrible coach. Michael Jordan, when he was a head coach, he was terrible as well. The greatest players in the world do not turn out to be great coaches. And so Patrick Waugh kind of fit that resume, but his history with the Quebec Ramparts was one of note. He was a very good coach down there. He brought them to some successful seasons, including the year prior to him coming up and coaching the Avalanche. And then the 2013-14 season enters, and the Avalanche go in with a very strong mentality and mindset. They play their first game of the year against the Anaheim Ducks, and they in their home building, the Pepsi Center, and they absolutely crushed them. 6-1 was the final score of that game, and I remember watching that game completely. I watched the whole entire game. Semyon Varlamov came this close to a shutout until Jakob Silfverberg scored with just 11 seconds to go in the game. Obviously, Patrick Waugh had a little bit of an incident in that game, threatening the Anaheim Ducks bench and players, and ultimately Patrick Waugh was fined for that. He's got a history of anger issues. That was obviously another big question. But the Avalanche pretty much kept that mindset for the rest of the season. They were on a long winning streak to begin the year. They didn't lose their first game in regulation until they played the Detroit Red Wings. Now, obviously, a lot of controversy with them came up in that year. Obviously, the Patrick Waugh situation. And then a similar situation with Semyon Varlamov, as he was charged for assault on his girlfriend with second-degree burns. Ultimately, the charges were dropped, and that's very good. That was very good news for the Avalanche, because he was probably their best player that whole season. But everyone on the Avalanche really played well that year. Ryan O'Reilly went on to have a career year. Matt Duchene had a career year that year. He took his game up to a completely different level from years past. He probably would have had even more points if not for an injury that kept him out of the rest of the regular season. Paul Stastny had a great year. Gabriel Landeskog had a career year as well. And then, of course, you had the rookie Nathan MacKinnon, who took a while to get his first NHL goal. It took him a little while to get going. But once he got going, he was just absolutely brilliant. I mean, it took him 4 games to get his first NHL goal. He took him a while to get goals. I mean, he was doing great as far as assists were concerned. He went on a long point-scoring slump at the beginning of the year, but once he turned it on, he really got going, and he just became an absolute machine for them. I mean, the Avalanche, they really inspired a lot of people, and that was what their season was about. Proving to the fans and the media that they can be a successful team. And so, with the kind of success they had all year, they went from dead last place in the Western Conference and second to last in the entire league, all the way to second in the Western Conference, third in the entire National Hockey League, and first in the Central Division. They just stole the Central Division title away from the St. Louis Blues. When it looked like the Blues had it locked, they went on a 6-game losing streak at the end of the year, and the Avalanche surpassed them by 1 point, and ultimately they would finish the year 52-26 22-8, whereas the Blues 52, 22, and 8, 112 points, first in the Central Division and second in the Western Conference, and third in the league. Only the Anaheim Ducks were better in the Western Conference, and in the entire league, only the Anaheim Ducks and the President's Trophy winning Boston Bruins were better. But that is something to write about in a story. That's one of those stories that you tell your children at night. To go from dead last place to be dead last place in your conference at the end during a season, and then one first overall draft pick, changing the complexion of the team forever, that's something you read your children to bed at night. And you look at a team like the Edmonton Oilers, 3 first overall picks in a row from 2010 to 2012. Taylor Hall, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and Nail Yakupov. Not to mention players like Jordan Eberle and Justin Schultz, adding the makeup to the team. 3 first overall picks in a row, and they still can't get into the playoffs. Colorado Avalanche, just 1 first overall pick, and they go from dead last place to first in the division. That's just unreal. And you look at that, better record than both the St. Louis Blues and the Chicago Blackhawks, who were the then defending Stanley Cup champions. And that's an even better record than the team that eventually went on to win the Stanley Cup, the Los Angeles Kings. That's just something special when you look at the Avalanche and the kind of season that they had. And Semyon Varlamov probably was one of the key reasons why this was possible as well. He went on to lead the National Hockey League in wins with 41 wins, and those 41 wins also broke Patrick Waugh's single-season record for most wins in a season by a Colorado Avalanche goaltender. That's a franchise record. I don't know how happy about it Waugh was, but Varlamov, of course, was very happy about it. And then you look at some other players. I mentioned the forwards, but how about some of the defensemen? You look at Erik Johnson. He came up and finally broke out and had a career year. Last year was a big year for Erik Johnson because he knew that if he did not have a good year last year, he was going to be labeled as a draft bust. He managed to keep that label off his shoulders for now, and he had a stellar season last year. He looked like the Erik Johnson we saw in his rookie year with the St. Louis Blues. And then you also look at a kid like Tyson Barrie. He comes up just completely out of nowhere and has a career year. Nate Gennin, another underrated defenseman who was never ever established himself in an NHL lineup up until last season. He had a career year as a shutdown defenseman. He was great. The Colorado Avalanche in general, they were just a great team last year, and they were so fun to watch. That's why you love those young teams. They're so much fun to watch. And they brought the city of Colorado back into hockey. They brought the fans back. It was great. They looked like vintage Colorado Avalanche, a team that had not won a division title since the 2002-2003 season, which coincidentally enough was Patrick Waugh's final season in the National Hockey League. They made the playoffs a few times since then, but they had not won the division. But they were just fantastic, the Avalanche. And in the playoffs, I don't think they were really expected to win that series. Even though they had the home ice advantage by a wide margin, they played the Minnesota Wild in the first round. I think that even though the Avalanche had a much better regular season and had the home ice advantage by a wide margin, and the Minnesota Wild were just a wild card team, I don't know if I'd say the Avalanche were necessarily expected to win that series. I think more or less they took that series as a learning experience. I don't think they expected to win because the Minnesota Wild, they had a lot of experience on their team and a lot of guys who had been in the Cup Finals before, particularly Zach Parise. And the Wild, they just had a lot of talent. The Avalanche, though, they had a great series. It was a great series, a fun series to watch, and it was a classic series. The Avalanche actually had leads in that series. They were blown, though, unfortunately. They had a 2-0 series lead, winning both of their first home games before surrendering both games in Minnesota. Minnesota came back to tie the series at 2. Avalanche go on to win Game 5 at home, courtesy of Nathan MacKinnon's overtime winner. He was brilliant in the playoffs, just as brilliant in the playoffs as he was in the regular season. Game 6, Minnesota Wild killed the competition on their home ice. The Wild, they were just so good on home ice in the playoffs, and that's what won them that series. And then Game 7, in overtime, Nino Niederreiter just steals one away from the Avalanche in Game 7 at the Pepsi Center. The Wild just stole Game 7 away from the Colorado Avalanche. I mean, you had to figure that was going to happen because the Wild were just so good at home, and even though they were terrible on the road, you had to figure that they were going to steal one on the road. But the Avalanche, they took it as a learning experience. They saluted the crowd at the end of the year, at the end of the series. And I honestly don't really think the fans really cared that they were eliminated in the first round. I don't think the fans expected them to go far. I think they were just really happy to see their favorite team back in the postseason. And you know what? Even though they didn't make it past the first round, one's got to think that they maybe would have gone farther had it not been for some key injuries in that series. They lost Tyson Barrie for the rest of that series, and he was quite arguably their best defenseman that year. Some say that he was better that year than Eric Johnson, and I have no problem arguing with that. You know, I think Tyson Barrie has the potential to be the best defenseman on their blue line for years to come. He's got a bright future ahead of him. But the Avalanche, the Avalanche, they really opened a lot of eyes last season, and that's a script that you can't just write. It's one that you have to perform. And the Avalanche did just that. To go from last place in the West to second best in the West and best in the Central Division, considering the deep talent in that division with Chicago and St. Louis, Minnesota, the Dallas Stars who are growing, even Nashville, you just that's something you just can't write. You have to act, and that's exactly what the Avalanche did. And even though they couldn't go farther in the playoffs, and as disappointing as that is, you always want to win the Stanley Cup, there's a lot to be proud of with this team. There's a lot to be proud of for the Avalanche this year. And honestly, what else to be proud of is that at the end of the year, they took home a lot of hardware. Patrick Waugh won Coach of the Year. Patrick Waugh won the Jack Adams Award for Coach of the Year, and he deserved it. He really did. I mean, he truly was the best coach in the NHL. Just what he managed to do for that team. I like Patrick Waugh. I always did. Despite his history and his anger issues, I always liked Patrick Waugh. I think, he was a great goaltender when he played, and I think he's going to be an even better, and I think he's going to be just as good a coach. For what he showed last year, and for what he was able to do with the Quebec Ramparts of the QMJHL, he has the making of a great Hall of Fame coach. He really does. And the Avs, they're going to win championships. They really are. They're going to be among the league elite in the near future. So Patrick Waugh won the Jack Adams Award. Nathan MacKinnon won the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year. He definitely did deserve it. I mean, considering the amount of time he played, he led all rookies in scoring, and he's a superstar in the making. He's going to be the best player on their team in the coming years. However, one could argue that a guy like Thomas Hertl from the San Jose Sharks maybe would have had more points and probably would have won it had he been healthy the whole year. And as much as I like Nathan MacKinnon and I like the Colorado Avalanche, I probably could say that is a valid argument. Hey, who knows? Maybe even if Hertl was healthy, maybe he struggles down the stretch and MacKinnon just explodes. Anything could have happened if Thomas Hertl was healthy. But ultimately he wasn't, and that cost him the ability to even be a finalist and Nathan MacKinnon won the Calder Trophy for Rookie of the Year. Well deserved by Nathan MacKinnon. He is just going to be a stud. And then Ryan O'Reilly won the Lady Byng Trophy for the player who showed the most sportsmanship. And boy, did he ever deserve it. Only one penalty the entire year, 2 minutes in penalties, and that was just for playing with a broken stick. Are you kidding me? That's mind-boggling. Not one penalty all year, and the only penalty he did get came from playing with a broken stick, which isn't much of anything. That was in a road game against the San Jose Sharks that the Avalanche still won. O'Reilly's ability to stay out of the box also was key for the Avalanche last year, and Ryan O'Reilly really adapted well after the move from center to left wing. He really adapted well playing on the wing, and he had a career year. He led the Avalanche with 28 goals at the end of the year. He was their goal-scoring leader. He was great. I'm glad that the Avalanche got him re-signed, because that was one of the big things going into the offseason this year. If the Avalanche were going to be able to get Ryan O'Reilly re-signed, and they did. They did not have to send him to arbitration. He re-signed to a 2-year deal. After it looked like he was going to leave the Avalanche on many, many occasions, he re-signed to a 2-year deal. He likes playing under Patrick Waugh. He likes the way he coaches. So, good move by the Avalanche to get O'Reilly re-signed before arbitration. He's a big part of their team, and if they had lost him, that was going to be a big problem for the team because they already lost Paul Stastny, and that's something we're going to get into right about now. With the Avalanche, even though they won first place in the Central Division, and even though that playoff series was merely just a step forward, you still got to build off it, and you still got to make changes because you always want to go farther, and there's always room for improvement. And that's what this offseason was about for the Colorado Avalanche, getting older, getting a little bit older, a little bit more experience, and getting a little bit better. And being able to fill the holes that were lost. The big loss for the Colorado Avalanche this offseason was the loss of center Paul Stastny. He had such a good year last year after having a terrible lockout-shortened year. Last year, 25 goals, 35 assists, and 60 points in 71 games, a +9 rating, 22 penalty minutes, and 150 shots on goal. And in the playoffs, through 7 games, 5 goals, 5 assists, 10 points, -1, only 4 penalty minutes, and 13 shots on goal. He was quite arguably their best player in the playoffs. A major comeback year from the lockout-shortened year. He had a great year, Paul Stastny, and he's going to be missed by the organization. They wanted to get him signed, but at the same time, I don't think they were going to get him signed. They asked for way too much and much more than the team could bargain for. It was more than the team could bargain for, and so for Paul Stastny, he went on to sign with the St. Louis Blues. He'll get a much bigger role out in St. Louis. He'll be their top-line center. He's making $7 million a year, 4 years, $28 million. That's a big contract. One of the big signings of this offseason and the top center on the market. And other than Paul Stastny, they did lose some other players. Andre Benoit, they lost on defense. He had a really good year last year. I actually think that's a pretty big loss. He went to the Buffalo Sabres. He went to the Buffalo Sabres. They lost Matt Hunwick, who only played 1 game last year. He went to the New York Rangers. Brad Malone, who was a player that they was up and coming to play on the 4th line in the future. He actually played the most of the playoff games for the Avalanche this past year. He went on to sign with the Carolina Hurricanes. He'll be a good 4th liner. They lost P.A. Parenteau in a trade. We'll talk about that in a minute here. But they also lost 2 players to retirement. John Sebastian Jaguar, who was their backup goaltender for the last couple of years, went on to he officially announced his retirement. And for him, it was definitely time to go. He was 39 years of age. He's definitely not the goaltender he used to be. It was definitely time for J.S. Shiger to go. He will be missed by the league. What a goaltender, and a goaltender that made a lot of history in the league. And they also lost defenseman Corey Sarich. He also went on to announce his retirement. Unfortunately for Sarich, an injury pretty much ended his career. I actually kind of liked Corey Sarich last year. I thought he played really well in the 54 games he played as a shutdown defenseman. He was really good for them last year. He's going to be missed on their blue line. I really think he will be missed. So they lost those two players to retirement, and again, they lost all those other players. And as far as their additions this offseason, they had a lot of additions to make, and one addition included acquiring center Daniel Briere coming over in a trade from the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for P.A. Parenteau and a draft pick. So P.A. Parenteau was not very good last year, I don't really think, and they were set to get rid of him anyway. He wasn't very good last year. After he was pretty darn good in the lockout shortened year. In the Avs' terrible season, he was one of their upsides in the lockout shortened year, and they expected him to have a better year in 2013-14. He did not. In fact, he had an even worse year. He was so bad. It wasn't terrible, but he wasn't great. He wasn't what they expected, and so they dealt him to the Montreal Canadiens. He'll help them out. He'll help out their top six. He's got really good hands, great passing abilities, so he'll help out the Montreal Canadiens. As far as Danny Briere is concerned, this is an interesting one because he's 36 years of age. He'll be 37 on October 6th. Okay, I said Giguère was 39. I think he was actually 36 also, or 37. But Danny Briere really did not play well last year. The age has really caught up to him. He was not good in the lockout shortened year, his final year with the Philadelphia Flyers, and he wasn't much better in his one season with the Montreal Canadiens. In 69 games, 13 goals, 12 assists, 25 points, a +1 rating, 30 penalty minutes, although he did generate 118 shots on goal. So he generated a lot of shots on goal, but he was constantly seen on the fourth line and also constantly seen as a healthy scratch. So he wasn't very good during the regular season, and the age really has caught up to Danny Briere. He's not the same player he used to be. He was not very good in Montreal, and he's only got a year remaining on his contract anyway. He had signed a 2-year deal with the Montreal Canadiens. However, I think the real reason why the Avalanche got this guy was because of his performance in the playoffs. In the playoffs, he was much better. He played every game for the Montreal Canadiens through 16 games. He had 3 goals, 4 assists, and 7 points, and only 4 penalty minutes, and he generated 20 shots on goal, though he was a -1. Danny Briere is one of those guys who is always good in the regular season, or usually good in the regular season, but he always takes it up another level in the playoffs. This is a player who thrives playing in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and I think that's why the Avalanche got him, because they know how old he is. He's not getting any younger, and I don't think they're expecting him to have a really great regular season. I think they acquired him specifically for the playoffs, because in the playoffs, he's a very skilled, very talented player, still got a lot of talent for his age, great hands, and, he's a guy who can be relied on, and he is playing well. He's very reliable. He can play both the power play and the penalty kill despite his small 5'9", 174-pound frame. He's a right-handed shot, so he can play either center or right wing. He'll probably play right wing, most likely, with the Colorado Avalanche. And he'll probably be in the bottom 6 as well. But he's going to go into Colorado trying to prove himself. The good news, again, is that he only has a year on his contract, so if he does disappoint, it's not that big a deal, because it's not a big cap to take on. But he is very talented. I think Danny Briere is a very talented player, and I think he'll help the Avalanche. I really do. I really do in one way or another, whether it's in the regular season or in the playoffs. Because if the Avalanche get to the playoffs, which I do think they will, we'll talk about that more later. You gotta expect that they will make the playoffs after build off the kind of year they had. Briere is going to help him in the playoffs because this is a pure playoff performer. He really takes his game up another notch in the playoffs, and that's why they got him. But they also brought in a couple other players. They brought in defenseman Bruno Gervais, who's coming over from the Philadelphia Flyers. He did not play a single game last year for the Flyers. He's just add some depth. He was just brought in to add some depth on the blue line. He's really more of a seventh or eighth defenseman. He'll just add some depth on the blue line for them. And then they brought in defenseman Zach Redmond coming over from the Winnipeg Jets, another somewhat young defenseman. He's 25 years of age, so he's still got time to grow. He's 26 now. So he's only got another year to grow, but he's a shutdown defenseman. I don't know how much he's necessarily going to play, but he'll battle for a spot, and he works hard. He hasn't solidified an NHL roster spot yet, but another defenseman who will more likely add depth to their blue line. They brought in center Ben Street from the Calgary Flames, another player who's probably nothing more than a 13th or 14th forward. He'll probably spend most of his time with the Lake Erie Monsters of the American Hockey League. But we'll probably see him at least called up a couple times to play some NHL games. So we'll see. And they also brought in center Jesse Winchester. He's coming over from the Florida Panthers. He actually had a really good year last year, and he'll add on nicely to the bottom line, to the fourth line if he does play. And then they also brought in some youngsters. They brought in an undrafted defenseman, Maxim Noreau, who's 27 years of age. He's been playing in the Swiss League the last few years. He's played a total of 6 NHL games, all with the Minnesota Wild. So he's back in the league, and he's another defenseman who could crack the lineup this year, but ultimately adds depth on the blue line. And then they also officially signed left winger Troy Bork, who they actually drafted in the third round, 72nd overall of the 2012 NHL entry draft. He's 20 years of age, so he's really young. He's another player. I think they have him on the additions list because he's ready to turn pro this year. He'll battle in training camp this year, and if he doesn't make the team this year, he'll probably go to the American Hockey League. He'll play in the American Hockey League. He's ready to turn pro this year. And we'll talk more about him when we get to the top 10 prospects because he is on that list. I am going to give that away. They also made another trade this offseason. The Danny Briere trade wasn't the only trade they made. They also acquired defenseman Brad Stewart from the San Jose Sharks in exchange for a draft pick. But on the side of the San Jose Sharks, very, very questionable trade, despite the fact that he is 34 years old and he'll be 35 in November. But I will admit, though, Brad Stewart's play has gone down in recent years. The 2 years he spent in his return to the Sharks were not great years for him. He did not play well, and he really hasn't been that good since he left the Detroit Red Wings. Hopefully the change to the Colorado Avalanche will help him out. Even though he is 34 years of age, he's still a good shutdown defenseman, a guy who will stand you up at the blue line. And he's very big, 6'2", 215 pounds, and he's a shutdown defenseman. He used to have some offensive talent, but doesn't have that anymore. He's past that point in his career, and he's a guy who's going to block shots and stand up players at the blue line. He's going to do a rather good job at it too. So I think that's actually a good trade for the Avalanche. He adds some more depth to their blue line, and he'll play in their top 4. Again, the age factor is a concern. He's not the kind of skater he was in the past. His skating is not there anymore. He's 34. He'll be 35 in November. So we'll see how Brad Stewart does fare in Colorado, playing with a guy like Tyson Barrie and bringing some wisdom and experience on that defense pair. He could even play possibly on the top pair with Eric Johnson if Jan Hejda doesn't work out up there. Jan Hejda is another guy who's not getting any younger. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, Jan Hejda, he's 36 years of age, so he's not getting any younger either. But he plays well, he's a good player. So we'll see how it all works out for the Avalanche. And then the big signing this season for the Avalanche, the big signing this offseason for the Colorado Avalanche was the addition of a veteran player. They added veteran right winger Jerome Iginla coming over from the Boston Bruins. Now, Jerome Iginla is 37 years of age. He turned 37 on July 1st. His birthday is on Canada Day, the free agent frenzy day, and he signed with the Colorado Avalanche on that first day. So he actually signed with the Avalanche on his birthday as his self-birthday present. Last year for the Boston Bruins, in the lockout-shortened year, it looked like the age had finally come for Jerome Iginla. In the season split between the Calgary Flames and the Pittsburgh Penguins, he did not play well, It looked like the age finally came to form for him and that his play was finally gone. But then he went to the Boston Bruins for 2013-14, signed a one-year deal with them, and when he came to the team, he was put on the top line with David Krejci and Milan Lucic to replace Nathan Horton, and he played really, really well on that top line. And he had a great season. Surprisingly enough, Jerome Iginla with the Bruins proved that he still had it. Through 78 games, 30 goals, 31 assists, 61 points, a plus 34, which is actually a career high for Jerome Iginla. That plus 34, he's never had a higher plus minus in his career. So defensively, that was his best season ever. Only 47 penalty minutes, and 209 shots on goal for the President's Trophy winners. And in the playoffs, 12 games played, 5 goals, 2 assists, 7 points, even plus-minus rating, 12 penalty minutes, and 26 shots on goal. So overall, he was fantastic for the Bruins. So good that the Bruins were talking to him about a re-signing. And not only did the Bruins want to re-sign Jerome Iginla, but I think Jerome Iginla also wanted to re-sign with the Bruins. But Iginla, I think, wanted a certain amount of years and a certain amount of money, and the Bruins unfortunately did not have the cap space to re-sign Jerome Iginla. So, by the dismay of both sides, they had to let Iginla go, and ultimately, Iginla did get the deal he was looking for, and it came with the Colorado Avalanche. He signed a 3-year deal. With the club. So he signed a 3-year deal with the club, with the Avalanche. I don't remember the amount of money he signed for, but yeah, they ultimately signed him, and he is their big addition. And now the big question is, will Iginla still be able to bring that same kind of magic that he brought to Boston? Will he fit playing on a line? Will he fit playing on a line with guys like Nathan MacKinnon and Gabriel Landeskog, which is now officially the top line for the team. Iginla is expected to play on the top line with those two, and which would relegate Matt Duchene to the second line with Ryan O'Reilly and Alex Tanguay, who is expected to return 100% healthy. He missed the rest of last year. He missed most of last year due to injuries. But if Jerome Iginla is playing well, it's not going to come till later on. Again, this is a player who always has a rough start to his seasons. He even had a rough start last year. He turns it on come November, December, late November, early December. He will not have a good month of October, so the big talks of him being a disappointment will come early on in the year. But when he turns it on, this is a player who skates well. I mean, obviously, probably not the same skater he used to be, but he has a good shot, great set of hands, good skill, work ethic, and he battles. He's a battler. He goes to the net, and that's what's made him so successful in this league for so many years. And he's not afraid to drop the gloves either. He'll protect his teammates, and he's just going to add wisdom to a very young group. He's been in the Stanley Cup Finals before, back in 2004 with the Flames, so he'll bring that aspect to the club. He'll give them the wisdom and experience needed to propel them to move forward in the playoffs. But that is the big signing for the Colorado Avalanche this year. He is their big addition, which brings us to some of the big questions for the Avalanche this year. But also, I mean, the Avalanche did again re-sign a bunch of players this year too. They re-signed Jamie McGinn to a 2-year extension. When it was thought out that he was going to leave, they gave defenseman Nick Holden a 3-year contract extension that won't begin until next year. Nick Holden was one of the big surprises for the Colorado Avalanche. They did not expect him to put up the kind of numbers he did. They did not expect him to be the kind of factor that he was. And, of course, they re-signed Ryan O'Reilly to a bridge deal, 2 years, to avoid arbitration. That was their big re-signing, and they already lost Paul Stastny. They could not afford to lose Ryan O'Reilly. If they had lost O'Reilly as well, then they would have been in some big trouble. But now we take a look at some of the big questions for the Avalanche this year. Who will replace Paul Stastny as the center on the second line? Well, they probably won't have to look too far because Nathan MacKinnon, who played right wing all of last year, is expected to go back to his natural center position that he played with the Halifax Mooseheads of the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League, the position he was very successful at. So there's no problem there. They don't need to go out and bring in a center. There's no issues. So they don't have to look far in that aspect. But the big question is he going to play on the second line? Or will that be now Matt Duchene's responsibility while MacKinnon moves up to the top line? We will see. It's going to be really interesting to see this year. Who will play right wing on a top line, or now a second line that likely will include Ryan O'Reilly and Matt Duchene? There's a lot of options, obviously, because Iginla, it was 3 years, $16 million. But Iginla will most likely, even though he could play on that line, will likely start the year with MacKinnon and Landeskog. So you got options like Danny Briere. Briere could possibly play on that line, play the right wing side, which would allow Ryan O'Reilly to stay on the left wing side. Or probably one of the bigger possibilities and more likely possibilities would be to put a healthy Alex Tanguay on that line and move Ryan O'Reilly to the right side. We'll see, though. It's going to be interesting to find out who plays on that line. I mean, Jamie McGinn is a possibility. Even guys like John Mitchell and Maxime Talbot are possibilities as well. So we'll see. Did the Avalanche do enough to improve their weakest link? The weakest link for this team is on defense. And as good as their season was overall, one big problem that the Avalanche did have all of last year was puck possession. They were not a good puck possession team, they were not a good defensive team, and they surrendered the 6th most shots in the National Hockey League. The reason they were so good was because of the play of Semyon Varlamov. He probably was their best overall player last year, and he pretty much did it all by himself. 41 wins. Hopefully the addition of Brad Stewart, who they acquired in exchange for a second-round pick in 2016 and a sixth-round pick in 2017 from the San Jose Sharks. Hopefully his physical presence will add on to the team, and hopefully Eric Johnson will be a little bit more physical this year. He'll be challenged to be a little bit more physical as well. Zach Redmond is another guy who could develop the same way Nick Holden did, and both of them could be good presences could be physical on the blue line. They also have a good youngster in Stephon Elliott, who has yet to realize his full potential, but he could come up as well and become a force again. He's played in the league before. Last year, he only played one game. So we'll see how that works out. Can Vezina Trophy finalist Semyon Varlamov build off last season? And will Rito Berra be a capable backup? They acquired Rito Berra as their sole trade deadline acquisition last year, and it was more of a trade acquisition for the future. They gave him a 2-year extension as soon as he was acquired from the Calgary Flames, but they acquired him in the knowledge that it was probably J.S. Giguère's last season. So now, Rito Berra is going to come up full-time and probably be the backup to Varlamov. Varlamov, again, we talked about all the awards won. Varlamov was also a finalist for the Vezina Trophy. Ultimately, it was Boston Bruins starting goaltender Tuukka Rask who would win the honor. But one's got to hope, one's got to wonder if Varlamov has the potential to be not only just as good, but maybe better than he's been in the past. I mean, during his days with the Washington Capitals, he was not a consistent goaltender, and when he first came over to the Colorado Avalanche, he wasn't that good. Last year was just a complete breakout year for Varlamov, and he has the potential to continue that magic. And he has the potential, as he's shown, he has the potential to win the Vezina Trophy as well. So we'll see. I like Varlamov. I think he's got the potential to repeat that success. I think he was left in good hands. And unlike last year, will the Avalanche have enough depth up front to take the pressure off the top two lines? Again, they added Danny Briere and Jesse Winchester, who signed for 2 years, $1.8 million. And they still got guys like, Jamie McGinn, John Mitchell, Maxime Talbot, Cody McLeod, Patrick Bordelot, Marc-Andre Cliche, and a youngster like Joey Hishin, who's going to battle for a spot this year as well, despite his injury history. They have a lot of guys who are going to battle this year. Troy Bork, another kid who's going to battle for a spot. But I don't think the depth went anywhere. I mean, yeah, they lost Paul Stastny, and it sucks. That was a big loss for the Avalanche. They wanted to bring him back. But you can't criticize their depth just because of one loss, I mean, Nathan MacKinnon is a guy who's going to be great, and he's going to take on that role that Stastny left behind. And he's probably going to be even better than Paul Stastny. He'll be a top 5 player in this league for many years to come. So, I'm not too concerned about their depth. Probably the biggest question that I personally have is, will these old-timers that Joe Sakic brought in help the younger kids on the Avalanche and not slow this team down? That is the one thing I will admit. With Paul Stastny on the team, they were a much faster team. They were a very fast team last year, and they were one of the fastest teams in the NHL. Now they have these old-timers coming in, and it does slow the team down a little bit. This is a team that plays a high-tempo, speed-type game, and now one's got to wonder if these old-timers are going to slow them down. We'll see. I'm not guaranteeing that. And these old guys that they brought in, Danny Briere, Jerome McGinley, Brad Stewart, and a guy like Jan Hayda, who they already have as an old-timer, they make this team much older. I mean, now that they have more experience, and of course Alex Tanguay, who's also coming back, and yes, they are more experienced now, but they do lose a little bit of speed now. So we'll see. We'll see how it all molds together this year. As we now take a look at the Avalanche's projected lineup for this year, obviously, as I said before, there's a possibility that Jerome McGinley could play with Matt Duchene and Ryan O'Reilly, but his most likely destination is to play with Nathan MacKinnon and Gabriel Landeskog. Nick MacKinnon, who played right wing last year, will move to center, and the line will be Nathan MacKinnon centering Jerome McGinley on the right, and the captain, Gabriel Landeskog, on the left. That'll probably be not the second line, but probably the top line. I think that will overtake the Duchesne O'Reilly line as the top line, and then Matt Duchesne will center Ryan O'Reilly, who will probably move from the left side to the right side, at least as an experiment, and then the Alex Tanguay will play on the left side of that line. He's 34 years of age. He'll be 35 in November. And even though he only played, and through 16 games played last year, he was very good through 16 games. 4 goals, 7 assists, 11 points, a +7, 4 penalty minutes, and 24 shots on goal, which tells you that if he was healthy the whole year, he probably would have had a spectacular year. He now has to come back and show that he could still play at that high level despite the injuries. Hopefully the injuries won't hold him down, but we'll see. You can never tell when it comes to injuries in the National Hockey League. Third line probably will consist of John Mitchell centering Daniel Briere on the right side and Jamie McGinn on the left side, who of course was re-signed this offseason by the Avalanche. I like that third line. I think it's a good third line. John Mitchell has been so good since coming over to the Avalanche. His career has just skyrocketed since coming to the Avalanche, and he's become a reliable depth player in the lineup. And then the fourth line, this is where it kind of gets interesting. A lot of players can battle for this fourth line. But the projected lineup is Marc-Andre Clichet centering Maxime Talbot and Cody McLeod, with Jesse Winchester as the 13th forward, and Patrick Bordelot, who led the team in penalty minutes last year, is the 14th forward. That's interesting because Winchester, I feel, can play full-time in the lineup. I think he's a very valuable fourth liner. He was very good last year for the Florida Panthers. May have been his best year, actually, despite the fact that he was playing on a team that didn't make the playoffs. It was his best year. It truly was his best season last year, which maybe tells you that he's maybe getting better. So we'll see. We'll see how it works out. They also have, again, 2 forwards in Joey Hishin and Colin Smith, who could both battle for roster spots this year as well. Colin Smith is another kid, 21 years of age. He could be ready to make the big jump this season. We'll see, though. We will see. But ultimately, up front on offense, even with the loss of Paul Stastny, I don't think there's any room for concern on that with that group of forwards. I like that group of forwards. I think it's a deep group of forwards and worthy to get back into the playoffs. Defense, though, that's where a lot of the questions lie for this team, because again, they were not a good puck possession team last year, and they surrendered a lot of shots last year. Defensively, they were not a great team last year. And it's funny because I actually do think they have a good group of defensemen. So it's kind of surprising to me. I mean, again, Corey Sarich is gone. He retired. But they got Jan Hejda and Eric Johnson. That's the top pair. But again, Brad Stewart could battle Jan Hejda for that top spot, playing with Eric Johnson. Whichever one doesn't play with Eric Johnson will probably play on the second pair with Tyson Barrie. However, Tyson Barrie is still a restricted free agent. They need to get him signed before the training camp begins. He's their big RFA right now, and probably one of the biggest RFAs, if not the biggest RFA in the league. Barrie had such a good year last year. 13 goals, 25 assists, 38 points through 64 games played, 17 plus 17. Only 20 penalty minutes and 101 shots on goal. Sadly, though, he only played 3 playoff games. He got hurt in the playoffs. And the right-handed shooting power play quarterback, though, generated 2 assists, plus 3, and 2 shots on goal. He probably would have had more if he had stayed healthy, and the Avalanche probably would have gotten farther in the playoffs if he had stayed healthy. But it's projected that Brad Stewart will play with Tyson Barrie and give him some experience. So Jan Hejda and Eric Johnson on the top pair, Brad Stewart and Tyson Barrie once he gets signed on the second pair. That's the top 4. And then on the third pair, Nick Holden will probably play with Nate Gennon with Ryan Wilson as the 7th guy. Ryan Wilson is a guy who's taken himself out of the top 6 over the last few years because of injury issues. He looked like a player who was going to be a good fit in the top 6, but he's not that anymore. He's officially in his prime now. He's 27. He'll be 28 in February. But his injury problems over the last couple of years have made him such a bad defenseman, or not a bad defenseman, but has made him more of a seventh guy rather than a top six guy. I mean, he could kick someone out of the top six. Say if a guy like Nick Holden or Nate Gennin, if one of those two regress, he could take one of those spots in the lineup if one of those two regress. They also have Stefan Elliott, who's been knocking at the door, and Zach Redmond, who can both battle for spots. And they also, again, have Bruno Gervais, who will also try to get himself back into the lineup, back in a roster spot as well. So don't knock Bruno Gervais out. And then in goal, again, no concerns as far as the starting goaltender. It's really with the backup goaltender that can be a concern. I mean, again, but going back to the defense for a minute, like I said, also Maxim Noreau is another guy who's going to battle. Duncan Siemens and Chris Biggrass could also battle for spots this year as well. But again, there's no concerns with the starting goaltender, Semyon Varlamov. It's with the backup goaltender, Rito Berra, that the concerns could come in. Berra's out to prove that he could be a solid NHL goaltender this year. Hopefully he can be, because even though obviously things go, backup goaltending can be just as valuable as starting goaltending in a lot of ways. You need a good backup goaltender who could relieve the starter of some starts, because if the starter starts too many games, he wears out and he's not as good come playoff time. So Rito Berra needs to be able to relieve Semyon Varlamov of some starting time, and hopefully he does. If not, they have a good young upcoming goaltender in Sammy Adocalio, who could take a spot, and even possibly Calvin Pickard could come up as well. As we now take a look at the Avalanche's top 10 prospects. For the Colorado Avalanche, this is an interesting top 10 group, because as far as projections are concerned, this is the first team so far this year who has top 10 prospects, all of which are not ready to make the team this coming season. All of these top 10 prospects have to wait at least a year before they're ready to play, or at least that's what they're projected. But despite that, this is actually a really good top 10 group. I like this group a lot. I don't think it's as good as the St. Louis Blues or the Chicago Blackhawks or the Nashville Predators. I think it's in the middle of the pack. I think it's slightly better than the Winnipeg Jets. I think it's better than the Dallas Stars, and it's 10 times better than the Minnesota Wild. So, as far as the Central Division goes, the Minnesota Wild have the weakest top 10 group, while the Chicago Blackhawks have the best top 10 group. The Colorado Avalanche are pretty much in the middle of the pack, even though none of their players are NHL ready this year. I mean, Connor Bleakley, their 23rd overall pick from this past year's draft, is their top prospect now, and he's not going to be ready to play for another 2 years. I mean, he'll go back to play for the Red Deer Rebels of the Western Hockey League for a couple more seasons, but this guy is a leader. He's a battler, a leader. He was named captain as a 17-year-old on November 2013. He's only 6 foot, 197 pounds, but he does a little bit of everything. He's so good on Canada's bronze medal team at the 2014 Under-18 World Championships. He had 1 goal and 2 points, but was very good defensively. He's an all-around player, and he's going to be very good. He's their top prospect. They have Chris Biggrass, a shutdown defenseman, their second-round, 32nd overall pick from 2013. He's their number 2 guy. Joey Hishin is number 3. Now, again, because of his injury problems, his projected time of arrival has gone down. He's now not expected to play until he's 24, 2016-17. However, he did play a couple of playoff games last year. He got into 3 games in the Stanley Cup playoffs last year and had 1 assist. So these projections could actually be wrong, and he very well could be ready to make the jump this year if he stays healthy and if he has a good camp. Hishin's going to go into camp, and he's going to have his chance to battle for a spot. But some people don't think he'll make it, but we'll see. I think this is an interesting prospect, but he has to stay healthy. Duncan Siemens, he'll battle for a spot this year, as will Chris Bigros, but both of them will probably have to wait one more year before they're ready. They're both shutdown defensemen, and they'll both add on to a young group. Their number 5 prospect, Troy Bork, who they signed as he's now ready to turn pro this year. He was so good for the Prince George Cougars of the Western Hockey League. He even got into some American Hockey League games for the Lake Erie Monsters. This guy, they are excited about this kid. He may need to wait another season before he's ready, but he'll go into camp this year and battle as well. And we'll see. He could impress people. I could actually see him getting into at least a couple of NHL games this year. Sami Aito-Kallio out of Finland, he's a good goaltender who could come up and be the backup if Frito Berra doesn't play well. Calvin Pickard is on that list. Spencer Martin, another goaltender. Dennis Everberg is on this list at number 9. And then Cody Corbet, a defenseman who's number 10, undrafted. He's the only American prospect on this list, but he's an undrafted defenseman, but was so good, was just an offensive dynamo on the blue line for the Memorial Cup winning Edmonton Oil Kings of the Western Hockey League. He was their power play quarterback, and that's why the Avalanche signed him. He may need a year in the American Hockey League, but he could be ready within the next couple of years to make an impact on the team. So this is a good top 10 prospect group. However, the prospect, in my opinion, even though Connor Bleakley is number 1, the prospect that stands out in my eyes as my best prospect would probably have to be their number 5 prospect, left winger Troy Bork. I don't know too much about Troy Bork, and I haven't really seen his highlights, but after looking at his statistics, 69 games played for the Prince George Cougars of the Western Hockey League, 29 goals, 56 assists, and 85 points. He's their top scoring prospect. He's 20 years of age. He led the team in assists and finished second in goals while serving as an alternate captain. And he had, at the end of the year, he came up to the Lake Erie Monsters of the American Hockey League, played 15 games, and really impressed by scoring 3 goals, 4 assists, and 7 points. So he was very impressive. He's very versatile, even though he's only 5'11" and 176 pounds, so he does need some room to grow. He's completed his 4 seasons for Prince George with 84 goals and 236 points in 276 games. This guy's a playmaker. He really broke out this past year, though. This is where he played at his best. He's going to be a very good playmaker in the league. He's got great instincts. He probably just needs to grow a bit, but at the very least, he is going to go into camp and battle for a spot, but he's not projected to make the team this year, though he could potentially see a cup of coffee for the Colorado Avalanche this year. But I think this kid has the potential to be a top 6 forward one day. I like Troy Bork. I think he's going to be a good player for them. So Troy Bork is my highlight prospect. Now, for my opinion, the player on the Colorado Avalanche who has to be better this year in order for the Avalanche to not only get back to the playoffs, but win the Central Division again, without a doubt, in my opinion, has to be, it was a really tough decision, but in my opinion, the player who has to be better for the Avalanche this year, or has to be good for the Avalanche this year, I was thinking possibly Danny Briere, but he's not getting much younger. It is a veteran guy, but one who's maybe a couple of years younger, and that guy is Brad Stewart. We've talked about it before. Brad Stewart was acquired from the San Jose Sharks in a trade, but the Sharks obviously got rid of him for a reason. The reason being because they weren't happy with his performance when they did acquire him back to play his second stint with the Sharks from the Detroit Red Wings. He now comes to the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for a second-round pick and a seventh-round pick in 2016 and 2017, respectively, with the expectation that he's going to solidify their blue line a little bit, make them a little more aggressive on the blue line, and really shut down the opposition. He's more or less taking over Andre Benoit's role, because Benoit was so good for them last year. He's a physical shutdown defenseman who stands you up at the blue line, and he blocks shots. But he didn't do much of that with the Sharks the last couple of years, and his overall play has just gone down over the last couple of years. It's rare I say a player who's just acquired needs to be better, but that's pretty much the situation the Avalanche are in because they had a lot of players who were really good last year who are still on the team now. So you got to look to a player who they acquired. And Brad Stewart is that guy. They need him to be better. He's going to be playing in their top four, whether it's on the top pair with Eric Johnson or the second pair with Tyson Barrie once he gets re-signed. So that's my opinion. In my opinion, in order for the Avs to be a better team this year, they need to get better defensively, and they need to possess the puck a lot better and not let Semyon Varlamov do it all by himself. Because that's another big question for the Avalanche this year. Can Varlamov repeat the same kind of success he had last year, or will he go back to the old Semyon Varlamov, who was very inconsistent? I think it's all going to be a matter of if the Avalanche do become a better defensive unit. If they do, then yeah, he'll be just as good, if not better. If not, then I think Varlamov could have problems, and Brad Stewart is going to be a big reason behind this. So in order for the Avalanche to not only be good, but get back to winning the Central Division this year, Brad Stewart has to be better this season in his first season with the Colorado Avalanche, better than he was in his last two seasons with the San Jose Sharks. Overall, are the Avalanche a playoff team? Yes, they are a playoff team. They are a playoff team, and I kind of gave that away earlier. The real question, though, is if they're going to win the division again. That's a little bit tough to do with how young they are. Even though they have a lot of the older guys now, the big question is that mold going to mix? The mold of older and younger players, will that mix? Well, if not, then they're not going to win the division again. But ultimately, I think they will make the playoffs regardless. They are a playoff team, but they're probably not going to win the division again. I mean, it's really hard to do with the unit that they have, and that defense is just a little bit concerning of theirs. Their inability to possess the puck is a major concern. And so for the Avalanche and their fans, they may have to take a little bit of regression this year. It'll probably be a setback year in a sense, but not the kind of setback year that the New York Islanders went through last year in comparison to the 2013 lockout-shortened season, where they made the playoffs and then missed completely. They're not going to have that kind of a setback year, but it is going to be a setback year in the sense that they probably won't win the division again, considering when you consider teams like the Chicago Blackhawks and the St. Louis Blues, and even the Minnesota Wild and the Dallas Stars. They've all gotten better this year, and then you even look at the Nashville Predators to a lesser extent. They even got better this year, and they could actually steal a playoff spot from someone, and the Colorado Avalanche could very well be that team that falls out, I don't think that will happen. I think that group is very good. I think Nathan MacKinnon's going to have another good year. At least I hope he does. The sophomore jinx is a very common thing in this league. Hopefully that's something that won't be in Nathan MacKinnon's career. Hopefully he'll build off the kind of rookie season he had last year. If he does, then they're going to be a great team. If he has a setback year and goes through the sophomore jinx, then the Avalanche are going to have a really tough time this year, and they'll pretty much have to rely on Matt Duchene to be their top performer again, which is not an issue because I think Matt Duchene's a very good player. He's very talented, and he was their leading scorer last year for a reason. Even when he got hurt and missed the rest of the regular season, he still upheld his position as the team's leader in point scoring. So, I mean, it's questionable whether the Avalanche are going to win the division again. I think the loss of Paul Stastny, at the very least, potentially did take that aspect of their team away from them. But regardless of if they win the division or not, they are still going to be a playoff team. And they actually, with this older group that they got, the additions of Iginla and Briere and Stewart, Alex Tanguay coming back and hopefully staying healthy for the entire year, hopefully that'll propel the Avalanche, regardless of where they finish, to go even farther in the playoffs this year than they did last year. So even though they may not win the Central Division again, I think a lot of the guys who were good last year will come back and be just as good, if not better, this year. So are they going to win the Central Division again and go farther in the playoffs? That's in question. But yes, the Colorado Avalanche are a playoff team. There's no question about that. the Colorado Avalanche again are a playoff team. And that will do it for episode 147 of Hockey on the Spot, as well as the Central Division. So tune in for tomorrow's episode when we shift over back to the Eastern Conference and go take a trip to the Atlantic Division when we started off by talking about the league's worst team from last season, the Buffalo Sabres. So until then, this has been Hockey on the Spot, Brandon Barenfeld. I'm Brandon Barenfeld. Thank you all for joining me, and I'll see you all again tomorrow. Thank you, and have a great night.